Gosh Energy, proud sponsors of the GAA All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship and GAA Legends Tour Series of Crowe Park. Hashtag Hurling to the core.
Hello and welcome to the Tyrone Independent.ie's GAA podcast in association with Gosh Energy. I'm Slattery. I'm delighted to be joined for our football chat today by Dermot, Crowe, the Sunday Independent, and Tomás Ó'Sé, Kerry legend. Guys, how are things?
Good, yeah. Good.
And a lot of action to go over now in the football. We'll also be joined by John Mullane a little later to go over all the hurling as well. But Tomás, I suppose it's a big milestone for Kerry because as of this morning, they are now officially All-Ireland favourites in the bookies. So you can't hide behind Dublin still being the official favourites anymore, I suppose, after yesterday's game. A strange one in the sense that after Cork's first quarter, it looked like potentially a shot could be on the cards. But then 4-18 to 3 points thereafter. And it's about as dominant a display as we've seen from a Kerry team. You know, what's your kind of feeling on it now, 24 hours later?
Yeah, I suppose, well, it was a strange one. Like, I thought that Kerry would, I won't say course, but I was very, very disappointed in Cork yesterday. Very disappointed. I mean, they started well and you were saying, geez, yeah, you're going to get something out of this. You're going to learn something out of this. And in the first 10, 15 minutes, you were looking at it and you were saying, whoa, they're coming, they're mixing their running game. Powter had a couple of runs up the field. Meehan took off. They were kicking ball in. The two Hurleys were causing problems inside. And they got to the water break. Now, in between that, I think Kerry were kind of sloppy enough themselves with a couple of loose hand passes, a couple of stupid kick passes, a couple of wild kicks. David Clifford missed a one-on-one that you'd absolutely bank on him getting. But still, Cork were in the game. Jesus, what happened after was from a Cork point of view, it's ridiculous. And I don't know, I surely be to God, after the start that they had, there has to be questions asked about the last 45, 50 minutes where there wasn't a kick at all in them. There wasn't a move, there wasn't a switch, there wasn't a change. But in terms of Kerry, they were ruthless. They just did what was asked of them. I thought Paddy Clifford was outstanding from start to finish. I thought he's all over the place. He's in a good way. And they all clicked in. But at that stage, yeah, they are favourites, and possibly because they've wiped. But I would really, really say that it would have been great even if Cork had been able to test them. You'd expect Cork to have been able to last 40 minutes. That's what I was thinking. But geez, I think they completely, totally, utterly collapsed as a team. I thought it was a bit of a disgrace, really, the way it just, I don't know, it's very hard to put your fingers on it. And management would have to look at themselves and, I don't know, it's the same story with Cork, isn't it? It's the exact same story. It begs the question, like, what in the name of Christ were Kerry doing last year? Same Cork team, same, Kerry seem to be, I think they're working like animals are all around the pitch. I think they have an edge, a harder edge this year, definitely. And yeah, I would actually be a small bit, the Northern issue is a question for me, yeah, and I think you'd be questioned. I said it a couple of weeks ago, and it's working out exactly as that. Clare, they look after. Tiny. I thought there'd be a tiny step up. It was actually worse. So I'd rate Clare ahead of Cork. But it'll be a step up in Ulster. But the stars are aligning that Dublin or Kerry Cork would hopefully, or Kerry Dublin would hopefully meet somewhere along the line.
Yeah, Dermot, interesting reading Frank Roach's piece in the game today, and he was saying, Kerry were unbelievable, but with the caveat that Cork collapsed so thoroughly that he was kind of asking the question, how much do we read into it? Like, do we focus on Kerry's unbelievable attacking blitz that destroyed Cork, or do we kind of look more and say, well, do we know how good they actually are because of the Cork challenge? Like, where do you kind of fall in on that debate or that argument?
I suppose it's hard to know with that, to be honest, with any certainty, but like a 22-point win is a record win, which is incredible when you think of the long history of that fixture. Like, I know Tomás is talking about Cork's kind of inexplicable collapse, and he's right to go from a position where you would have thought, say, with a start like that, with David Clifford held scoreless, which is incredible, although he did fluff that chance that Tomás talked about. He should have scored it, hit it straight at the goalkeeper. But with those things happening, it seemed set up for at least a fairly feisty second half, and it didn't happen. And they just bulldozed them in the third quarter. Now, Cork, looking at, say, the league, which is a very, very honest way of judging teams, because it's a proper tiered structure. Cork were kind of in a relegation playoff in Division 2, and they've been hovering around that area for a while. Kerry are a serious championship contender. And the gap between that, there's so many different layers in football now, the gap between there and Division 1 is substantial, And if you have a team gets a run on you, like Kerry, with the ability they have from midfield up, with the attacking flow they have, the scoring potential they have, you can see it because Clifford only scored 1 point from a free, and yet they ran up, what was it, 422 or something like that. Then, these things can happen. These extraordinary scorelines can happen, and there is a very, very big gap between where Kerry are and where Cork are. And there was the proof of it, I mean, when Kerry got to up, to 16 points, 17-point lead, they actually just sat in that for a while and could have driven on if they wished, if they were pushed. But they kind of sat there for a while, and then they kind of had kind of a late kick where they ran off a few more scores and brought it into the 20s, the margin of victory into the 20-plus territory. So the problem is for Kerry is the lack of test, the lack of real test, and the gradient should be going up as you go along. And geez, you're winning a Munster final by 22 points. I don't know if that much good to them, but they can only do what they have to do themselves to go in, against the Ulster champions, and it'll obviously be a different ball game. And it looks like, as Tomás said, it's just a waiting game, really, with the greatest respect to everybody else, for another Kerry Dublin final. The championship has had a lot of big hidings, and it's not good,
Considering the beating they put on Tyrone in that league semi-final, I suppose if they end up playing them in a semi-final in the All-Ireland series, I don't know if people will be talking that game up as a big a challenge as it might have been in years gone by. But to us, one thing you mentioned there, and you were talking about yesterday on the television broadcast as well, is Paddy Clifford's performance on his emergence this year. I know you mentioned that he's been doing this for East Kerry probably for a while, but for people who mightn't have been as familiar with him, he's been an absolute revelation. Why do you think it has taken him a while to kind of break into the team? Has he needed to bide his time, or what's the situation for people who maybe aren't as familiar with them as people down in Kerry?
I think, to be quite honest about it, Will, I think it's been a mistake not to have him in there. I think if you look at Kerry the last few years, he is the type of player that you have missed within the Kerry squad. I mean, I think Kerry have lovely footballers. They have some great forwards, possibly a back or two still that you could put in there are really, really two tight defenders, really, really full-back tight defenders that you could put in there. I think he adds to the whole balance of the team. I think he gives you something a la Paul Galvin that gives you that little bit of steel out around the middle, who sees danger, who can read a game, who seems to be in the right place at the right time. And that isn't luck, that's being able to read a game. And I think he's a great kicker of the ball. I think Cork made an awful mistake yesterday putting Powter on Sean O'Shea. Powter's game is running, right? And at one stage, Powter made a run upfield. It was in the second half. And he was doing it in the first half as well, actually. But it was turned over deep, and Paddy Clifford, there was a pass out to Paddy Clifford, and he did it in a previous game as well. Outside of the boot, bang, straight down into Sean O'Shea's hands, and it turned out to be a goal. But Clifford, it's very, very seldom, kind of like Dooher in his day, where he can be back in defence at one stage, but then he is a goal-scoring threat, he is a point-scoring threat, and he has that hardness and toughness about him. I don't think the Kerry management, he was seen in Kerry as being a loose cannon, as somebody you couldn't trust, as a guy who was there a bit of wildness in him. And then as you're talking this, and as as this is being explained to you, you're saying, Jesus Christ, isn't that exactly what we were looking for? Isn't that exactly what we need inside the mix? And I don't think he was trusted. I think he was looked at in a wrong way. I don't think he was given a fair crack of the whip. I think in his interview yesterday on RT, the last question he was asked, did you think it would happen for you? And I thought it was a real genuine answer. He told the truth. Like he said, I don't know. And I think he was wrongly overlooked for the last 2 seasons because people think, oh, they're after finding a gem. This fella, I saw this fella in a team with Sean Shea and Shawnee Powter and all these big stars with UCC when they won their last Sigerson, was it 3 years ago? And I watched the semi-final and I watched the final, and they played a Dublin team and a Northern team. They played Mary's Belfast in the final. He was the dominant player in all 2 of those games. And he was one of the dominant players at East Kerry, a star-studded East Kerry team have. I think it's been a mistake. Now he's in there and he's going well, and I'm glad he's going well. But I'd say he was overlooked because of the fact that he was seen as somebody that would cause too much hassle and wouldn't be able to control his temper. Whereas I found it myself when you were playing. At club level, you are that little bit loose. You are, and what I describe loose as, you'll take more chances and you'll do the devil because the refereeing standards at club level aren't what they are at inter-county level. So that did happen to me a few times within club level, and I'd say they thought, but I always found that myself. National League, grand, I was sent off a few times, but you can focus in and control yourself that little bit better in Championship. I didn't get sent off that much in Championship. But he has shown that because I saw him yesterday. He was poked at a couple of times by players and he didn't react. And I'm glad he's going well because he deserves it. He's a right good talent. But I suppose the other thing, and Dermot touched on it there, described them as a kind of a Division 3/2. They're about that. They were lucky to stay up in Division 2 this year. Westmeath, you're looking at the players and you're looking at the squad and you're looking, and then you're going to have to look at management and you're going to have to say, how in the name of God can you not put into place a style of play a la Clare with Colin Collins that can make them competitive? Because you see the success they have at underage. You see what Ricken does with teams. One of the 20 lost very narrowly with an average Cork 20 team in Tralee last year, comes along and beats them again this year, will probably win an All-Ireland even though they lost Corbett, their best player, to a cruciate injury. And you're saying, how in the name of God are Cork so competitive and so good and winning minors and winning under 20 All-Irelands at underage? And then there seems to be this mental block at senior level where they can't actually take that step forward and become a team. They don't have to become All-Ireland winners, but become a team that are consistent. Like somebody said it to me this morning, they're consistently inconsistent. And it's the management would have to look at it. It'd be very hard, Dermot. I don't know what your opinion would be. It'd be very hard after taking a hiding of 22 points and say, oh, we'll do something with this team. I don't know how you could.
Yeah, Cork are kind of a mystery to me because of just the size of the county, the terms of the numbers, and with the talent they have, the underage talent, the standard of player they produce at underage. Winning the 20 last year and the last under-21 championship, I think they win that as well. I mean, they've got to minor finals, so it's not that they don't have the caliber of a player, but they seem to underperform. They're one of these counties in football that, looking over the history of the game, don't punch above their weight. They punch below their weight. And, who would ever think in 2021 that Cork would lose to Kerry by 22 points in a Munster final? It's kind of extraordinary that it has happened, and it's baffling. I don't think it's kind of acceptable at all. So what the answer is, I'm not too sure. Obviously, there's a focus now on the management and how they set up their team and how they do things. Like I mentioned earlier on, about COVID and all that and the impact of COVID on team preparations. Cork obviously were in poor light because of that earlier in the year, but And that could be a factor to a point, but it doesn't fully explain all the poor performances and the underwhelming performances from Cork, given the resources, the size of the county, the record at underage. It just doesn't add up.
It was a tale of two collapses, Tomás, over the weekend, given Galway were in a commanding position at half-time against Mayo, similar to Cork, then they completely fell away. Mayo roared back into it and probably could have won by even more if they took a few more of those goal chances towards the end. What did you make of that game? I know you were in Crowe Park, so you got a good view of it in the second half. I suppose it's kind of been a theme of Galway since COVID. I think the graphic of the game was they've only won two matches, twice against Roscommon, and they've had some very, very poor results, over the course of the last 18 months.
Yeah, I think pre-match, we all kind of tipped Mayo to win it. And again, very like the first 15 minutes against Kerry, with the Kerry Cork game, you saw Galway actually show up, and then they start tagging the scores, and a couple of goals went in, and they actually missed a couple of chances, and you were thinking, right, this is going to be a right battle here. And at half-time, very easy to look at it now and say, sure, Mayo were always going to overpower them. At half-time, if Galway had come out, the big question I had for Galway was, could they slow Mayo down around the middle third? And could the guys fire up front? And by the guys that fire up front, I'm talking about the Finnertys and the Kellys and the Comers and the Walshes in particular. And in that first half, Conroy was outstanding at midfield and he was running the show. And Walsh was absolutely on fire. He was taking them on. He was running. He was spraying passes. But more importantly than that, Homer was a fulcrum inside in the full forward line where ball was sticking to him inside. He was winning ball. He was causing trouble. And that's a Mayo backline. Of all the backlines that are left in the championship, they are a hardy bunch, and they're tight and they're tigerish, and they don't fear one-on-one situations like other counties, Kerry included, do. And you're thinking, Christ, they have these fellas rattled here. But then at half-time, for whatever reason, like I looked at they kicked their first score in the second half, Galway, and they had a couple of misses. They had a couple of lads that came in on the end line. Comer missed a fisted shot at goal when they were level. That might have given them a kick-off, but they just looked flat, and it was the 61st minute when I looked up when they registered their first score. And at this stage, Matty Rowan had thundered into the game. They were a lot sharper, a lot tougher, a lot more physical in the middle third. And it was a different, I think the two McLaughlins added hugely to Mayo. The couple of switches that they made, Kevin McLaughlin was involved in nearly every score that Mayo created in that first 10, 15 minutes. But they got to grips with their kickouts, they squeezed Galway. But even that said, Will, I think, Galway would have to be disgusted with the way they absolutely collapsed. They just, like, the life went out of them. And very like Cork, you'd have to say, Christ, where was the fight? Where was the battle? Where was somebody giving a dig somewhere? Like, where was just one score, get a score to lift the tide, let's squeeze up. So, Pádraig Joyce, I saw this morning where Shane Walsh carried an injury into that second half, and he was a loss. But I think they lost their shape. I think Homer was inside, he was out. Shane Walsh, because of his injury, I presume now, was put into full forward. They just lost the run of the match altogether. And once it collapsed and there was no punch back, there was no return at all. It was one-way traffic, and Mayo just thundered into the game. And I thought what happened in the second half actually happened in the first half, if I'm quite honest about it. Not to the same degree that Galway wouldn't have any threat, but yeah, Mayo rattle whatever comes out of Leinster, which is Dublin. They'll give them a good rattle, I think.
Yeah, Dermot, like after seeing Mayo yesterday, and I suppose across the course of the campaign, given Cillian O'Connor has been absent, how impressed have you been with them? And like Tomás said there, how close do you think they are to potentially, taking a big scalp if it is Dublin or going on and winning an All-Ireland? Well,
I suppose the big talking about around Mayo was Cillian O'Connor's injury, and there's a kind of sense of nearly kind of fatalism around that in Mayo. Even more fatalism than you normally find in Mayo, maybe, because they felt that maybe that kind of killed their season, their prospects, because he's their main scorer. and an experienced player, as everybody knows. And the matches up to now, Sligo, Leitrim. Like I saw the Sligo game. I was up Markets Park. But it was such a comprehensive win for Mayo that how do you how do you read into that with any degree of certainty? But just leaving all that aside, like Darren McKay and a few of those, Brian O'Donoghue, they did look lively and useful, and Shea was causing trouble up there and that. And so the Galway game is seen as a more competitive test, and maybe you get a better read of what they're like, which you did to a point, but then Galway's total collapse in the second half is I think Mayo just upped the intensity, and Galway definitely the Shane Walsh knock or injury, whatever he picked up, seemed to be a factor, but the substitutions made a huge difference. So they finished with a much stronger side with the two McLaughlins on it, and with those fellas back, with injuries cleared up, with their experience at Croke Park, and with an improved forward line performance with Kevin McLaughlin in there, they have a shot at it. Definitely, they have a shot at it. I mean, I think, say for example, one of the things that changed between the first half and the second half yesterday was Tommy Conroy, who was very kind of outed in the first half. He took one awful shot for a point into the hillside, after doing the initial work well, and very patchy. Second half, he just upped his game completely, got a few great scores, went at the Galway defence. When they're playing like that, Mayo, they usually have a good performance in them in the big games in Croke Park, and they're I think they'll give it a right rattle, to be honest with you. I think they're in a good place. I think they're an odd team, an odd mentality in Mayo. Years ago, before they got to the 80, I think it was the 88 All-Ireland semi-final, they were playing Meath, and someone said afterwards that they were trailing Meath by about 7 points on the home run. The game was gone from them, and they played their best football from there on. It was like the pressure was off them, that kind of mentality. And with oddly enough, in a bizarre way, with O'Connor out of it, it kind of nearly gives them an excuse. Well, sure, look, we can always fall back on that. Maybe take some of the pressure off them. Sometimes when there's forwards like that who are prominent forwards in a setup, when they're taken out of it, some of the others, there's a different dynamic in the forwards then. Others come up, step up to the plate, and they maybe feel a bit freer and all that. Like even back to what Tomás was saying about Paddy Clifford is interesting, that he seems to be like a free spirit kind of figure, and he's added something new and fresh to it. So there's a kind of a freshness. The other thing, Matthew Ruan was fantastic, and kind of nearly Fenton-esque, maybe, without putting too much pressure on him. He did a lot of grace. He was very, very involved, got a great goal. I was impressed with Brian O'Donoghue, I have to say. I thought he was unlucky not to get that goal, to have that disallowed later on. There's a couple, like in the first half, the Shane Walsh, when he set up that goal for Comer, it was a bit alarming, mind you, because the way he went past O'Shea and Patrick Durkin, with like he just flew past them, and they looked slow. They were caught badly there, so that was a bit of a concern going into any semi-final. But on the whole, they had a very strong finish, strong second half, and Galway were very disappointing. Like three frees in the second half, not to score till about the 61st or second minute was shocking. They had one chance when Comer hit the crossbar, which you probably saw when he was back to goal, and old style flick, and it came off the crossbar, and even the rebound fell kindly for Mayo. Maybe a score there might have changed the momentum a small bit, but they couldn't get a score, and they were just swamped. There are a few injuries as well, like as I say, Shane Walsh, Sean Kelly went off, and Robert Finnerty went off the first half. But I think mostly it was just a change in attitude. They got the early goal in the second half, Mayo, and they kicked on from there. They just wired into Galway. They had that answer. So anyway, go back to answer your question, long-winded way I went about that, but I think Mayo do have a crack at it. I think they really have a crack at it. There's a big game. It's two big ends, and I'm not too sure, and I don't see them beating two, but they might catch one of them.
Yeah, Tomás, and maybe just to wrap up then, with Mayo and Kerry looking so impressive, and Dublin in action next weekend against Clare, like what is your view on Dublin and where they are at? There's been so many murmurings about what's happening in the camp, and obviously the absence of some key men, and how the team is performing. What's your read on that situation at the moment?
Just on the Mayo, I think Dermot O'Connor back was a key thing for them as well. But yeah, Dublin, I think they're not the Dublin that they were, and I think a good friend of mine in Dublin always said to me, even arguing when that huge debate was there about the advantages that Dublin had in terms of finances and in terms of population and in terms of that this 7 in a row and everything would continue on and that Dublin would dominate football for years to come. And he was always telling me, and the argument that a lot of that wasn't taken on board or wasn't accepted was that Dublin would churn out Kieran Kilkenny's and Brian Fenton's and Bernard Brogan's and Con O'Callaghan's, and it now looks like maybe that this super kind of a system that Dublin have isn't all as it was, that maybe the lads were saying that, there's a part of it that says they are a once-off group of players, and I won't say that they're going to fall off a cliff because population will mean they'll always have players coming through. They'll always. But I think it's a time where Dublin have right now, and we saw it against Meath in the last game, they have about 6 or 7 players that are capable of still winning them in All-Ireland this year and maybe next year. You have Brian Howard, you have Con O'Callaghan, you have Kieran Kilkenny, you have Brian Fenton, you have James McCarthy, and I'm forgetting somebody. Did I mention Kilkenny?
Dean Rock, maybe.
Dean Rock. Those players are absolutely key. Now, where I think, and it's not saying that they're poor players, but I think the rest of the players then aren't at the standard that Dublin were at in terms of their full 15, maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago. I don't think their subs bench is where it was 3 or 4 seasons ago. I think automatically when you change somebody like Jim Gavin and Desi Farrell, it's not like Desi Farrell is an outstanding manager, has proven himself at minor level and 21s. But it doesn't matter how good you are. If a different voice comes into a dressing room, if the dynamic is different inside in the dressing room, fellas that are there years and years that are used to one thing, it changes for them. I'm not saying it changes for the bad or the good, but something happens within that dressing room. I think this would be one of the sweetest All-Irelands for Dublin to win if they actually pulled it off. And I don't like the kind of talk that goes around, and you said it at the start of the show there, well, in the way Kerry are swatting teams over the way they are gone in as favourites, that's based also on the way that Dublin performed against Wexford, and I suppose the way they collapsed, well, not collapsed, but the way they were hauled back in by Meath for a time there in the second half. And I suppose it's not the Dublin we're used to. And the big question is now, will they ramp it up in the final against Kildare? And can Mayo, a fella says to me to be typical Mayo, I guarantee you Mayo will beat Dublin, he says, and Kerry will again beat Mayo. And I said, geez, you're looking too far ahead. I think Dublin need to steady the ship. Dublin, you see, there's a lot of talk. I think that Cluxton thing is hanging over them. I don't think they dealt with it very well. I think when something like that happens to a squad, it's it's leaving you open to constant scrutiny and constant questions and constant, is there a problem inside? And all these stories are coming around, and there's nobody deflating anything by just saying what we associate with Dublin is they come out with a statement, they nip it in the bud, they say nothing other than what this little statement does, and all our talk and all our guesswork is just gone. And I think that kind of air of confidence and air of organisation and air of, there's something about the mask that's after coming down a small bit, and I think teams will have that little bit more belief going in against them, basically. And I don't care. I've always said it. I don't care how good. And they're saying that Evan Comerford is a clone of Cluxton. And I've no doubt that he's performing. He's an excellent goalkeeper. But I've seen Cluxton winning matches for Dublin, and they'll always look up the far side and Dean Rock's great kicks and great frees, and they're pulling away at the end of the game. I guarantee you go back in all of those games, and Cluxton, with clutch moments, as they call it, has kept Dublin in games. Those finals that they won 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, guarantee you Cluxton, if it's in the fire, then, and if Comerford pulls off what Cluxton has pulled off for many a year, then I'll take my hat off to Comerford. But I do think they're the most vulnerable I've seen them in 10 years.
Well, it certainly sets it up to be an intriguing few weeks in the football championship. And now goodbye to Tomás Ó'Sé, and we'll welcome in John Mullane for our hurling chat on the Tyrone podcast in association with Word Gosh Energy. Dermot Crowe is staying here with us. And John, I'll go to you first, considering it was such an amazing weekend for your county, holding off Galway and that absolutely thrilling qualifier, leading by 16 points, I think, at the second half water break. Got down to a one-score game in the end before Waterford just about pulled away. You know, this is a couple of days later. How do you reflect on such a crazy game?
Yeah, and look, if I'm totally honest with, and everyone within the county are kind of blown away by the first half performance. I don't think anyone foresee this result coming. No, I wouldn't say foresee the results coming, because you always knew you had a chance. And look, our record against Galway is considerably good. And as I said last week in the article, it was a case of, which Galway was going to turn up. And we were expecting a backlash, but the backlash never came. And the backlash came from Waterford more so than anything else. And they were just extraordinary. It was, the first half was just frightening, absolutely frightening. And it was reminiscent of the second half performance against Kilkenny last year. And I actually think the game against Laois, albeit, the result probably wasn't what people expected. People were expecting a comfortable win. But I relate back to that game against Laois, and it was the manner in which they closed out the game. When questions were being asked, they came with the answers. And I think the game stood to him. Galway didn't have a game in 3 weeks, and they're right in the mix now. And I just honestly think momentum is with him going into this weekend, and I don't think anyone will want to play him. That's being straight with you, because if they bring that level of performance that we've seen for 35 minutes, they can beat anyone. And if they can even bring that level of performance 35 minutes, against Limerick, they're probably the one team that could go and trouble Limerick. I thought, we also remarked last week of how crucial Barron and Prunty were. And look, for me going into the game, we were down to Burke, as we all know. Stephen O'Keefe was after retiring. Then we lost Ira Daly, who would fit into the pocket for the Burke and mind that area. He was gone. And then I was kind of going based on, Barron is only getting 12 minutes into the legs. What way is he going to be? What way is Prunty going to be coming back from serious injuries? But we've seen it, how crucial Barron and Prunty are, and particularly Barron. He was, he's key to the whole lot. And I think even going forward into this week and hopefully the following week, I will be wrapping Jamie Barron up in cotton wool. And I thought Desi Hutchinson, albeit didn't score, I thought he was excellent up top. But I think from a Galway point of view, I think it's possibly the end of a road for this team. They've been a great team. They've had the success in 2017. They've had Leinster success. They've had league success. And what we're finding out now, Will, is that speed is king. And if you don't have speed out around that middle third, I'm going from your half back line up to your half forward line. You're not going to survive. And unfortunately for Galway, they didn't have enough speed out around that area. And Waterford just went to town in the first half, and it was good enough to see him over the line. And again, look, when the questions were being asked in the last 5 or 6 minutes, they responded very, very well, and they closed out the game, and they were deserving winners. And they can kick on to this weekend now that they play Tipperary, and it's a fixture. It's a mouth-watering fixture to look forward to again this weekend. But all in all credit to the lads. They were excellent.
Yeah, Dermot, I suppose as we sit here Monday morning, like what is the bigger story for you? Is it Waterford and their impressive performance, opening up a 16-point lead by the second half water break and kicking on and ultimately holding on? Or is it Galway and how they came in as second favourites to Limerick? A lot of people thinking they were a good All-Ireland contender. They lose both their championship games, and as John says, possibly the end of a line for a team that after 2017 people thought were primed to go on and win multiple All-Irelands.
Yeah, well, John has spoken mostly there about Waterford, so maybe I'll just focus a bit more on the Galway side of it. What John says is very true about speed. And Waterford have it in abundance, and that was an issue for Galway maybe, and a lot of attention was on Joe Canning passing the championship all-time scoring record on Saturday. And they've been kind of using him out around the middle of the field and all that. He's going to be 33 in October, and it's kind of a game now where around that area, you're talking about Jamie Barron, players like that, you need kind of fast, speedy players, and Waterford were kind of just going full throttle, coming off the shoulder. Credible. Jack Fagan got a point there where I don't know who did the offload. Was it Barron? And I only saw the highlights. I was at the Cork Clare game, and he was thundering forward, hitting it, at full speed, and just Galway were really struggling to live with that kind of pace. It's a very, very bad defeat for Galway. There's no way of getting around that, and it's another disappointing season, And given the talent they've had. And I know they waited a long time for that All-Ireland in 2017, 29 years, and we're very grateful for it. But the return of one All-Ireland for that kind of bunch of players, I think is disappointing, assuming they don't win one in the next few years. I think, as John alluded to there, I think there will have to be changes, and I think the team in its current form will have to change. So they were incredibly flat, it seems, in the first half. There were, the game against Laois, like John said, I think it's a great benefit. It's a championship game, no matter what. And the fact that we're tested would have stuffed them. And Galway's break was probably a problem, but it still doesn't explain the team being that flat, with that experience. And even when they got back into the game, I know they had a man extra. Extraordinary as it was, they got back to 3 points. And that kind of game management after that, where Waterford came back and scored 3 points, with the extra man that Galway had, was very poor. You shouldn't be allowing a team back scoring 3 points back like that before they got the other goal, and then it was too late. But so, they were making mistakes. They were letting fellas pick off scores from the sideline and things like that. Now that's purely from a Galway point of view. Obviously, Waterford were in exceptional form and they played really well. It was a tremendous victory for them. But just there was a lot of disappointing aspects of it around it for Galway. And I suppose for Shane O'Neill, it's just particularly disappointing. There'll be a focus on him now, I guess, as well, because it's his second disappointing year, as I say, where they haven't gone as far as they might. But like last year, at least, they left the championship with some credit, but this year has been a fierce disappointment.
Yeah, as you say, they were the only team really to get near Limerick last year.
Yeah.
They were level going into injury time in that All-Ireland semi-final. And John, if you look at the two teams, Waterford experienced that disappointment against Clare, Galway experienced disappointment against Dublin, and they just reacted so totally differently. Like Liam Cahill, for the second year in a row, has shown an ability to get his team to just perform really big on the big days.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose. Look, and I suppose Liam Cahill was very honest when he reflected on the defeat against Clare. In that he was a small bit inexperienced in how he went about his approach going into the next game, and I think he has to be applauded for that. But look, as I said, Waterford, what this result clarified the weekend is that Waterford are a serious side. And I'm even looking at the odds for the All-Ireland at present after the draw was made today. And I think it's a bit disrespectful to this team that they're still 14-1 to win the All-Ireland. They're second last favourites behind Dublin. And I think this Waterford team, I think after Limerick, possibly Cork, I think the lads reflected on it last night in the Sunday game. I think they're one of the top. They're in the top three, and he's most certainly building something there. He something in Waterford, and it's fantastic to see. And you go, you flip that over with Galway, and I think there's a big rebuilding job there for whoever, whether Shane O'Neill stays on or whoever comes back in. Particularly after they win in the four minor titles, and I just think, against the Dublin game, and I just think, even in the Waterford game, I just don't think Shane O'Neill probably, set out his stall the way he should have been. I just think there was too much chopping and changing. You're looking at a player like Fintan Burke who was on the bench. One of the games he had Adrian Tiwi up wing forward. For me, he was a top corner back in 2017. Why he wasn't in the back line is beyond me. Why he didn't start Evan Nyland, why he didn't start Jason Flynn when you see what he brought to the table when he came on. And those are four lads that have legs, speed. And if you're going to take on the likes of the Waterfords, the Limericks, the Corks of this world, lads, you need speed. And unfortunately now, the way the game is going now, even lads that played back in my era, the 90s, noughties, they wouldn't live in today's game, and top players at that, because the game is just, it's all based around speed now.
Yeah, Dermot, so speaking of Cork, you were at the game against Clare, as you mentioned earlier. Another similarly thrilling finale as well. Tony Kelly getting in for a goal chance that I think most people would have expected him to put in the back of the net, but it was a great save by Patrick Collins. Cork march on. They played Dublin in the All-Ireland quarter-final. I was interested to see really Brendan Cummins writing in today's Irish Independent. He was quite, I think, positive about how far Cork can go in this championship. From what you saw of them over the weekend, do you think they have a big say that they could potentially challenge a Limerick or a team like that?
I think, obviously they've played Limerick already, and there was a lot of positive stuff in that game for them, because they really did push Limerick, well into that match, but for poor shooting, could probably have put more of a press on Limerick. Now this is an excellent victory for them. Because they had to a lot is made of Cork's, talent, speed, that they're doing very well at underage level and all that kind of thing. And they're quite a young team, but they had to kind of grease it out, because Clare had a bit of a run on them. They overturned the deficit, went ahead, come up to about the hour mark or so, and they were in a bit of trouble. So they had to kind of dig it out, Cork, and they had to kind of fight. So that is a sort of an encouraging aspect to it for a mainly young side. They had, they're kind of developing the team. There were changes in it. Robert Downey came in, played very well at fullback, because Damien Cahalan was out with appendicitis. Colm Spillane is back there now on the bench, I see, after injuries, another good defensive option. So they're still kind of working it through. Seamus Harnedy showed a rejuvenation and form was very good. Horgan was much better from the Limerick game. What they have, I suppose, is Cork coming into Cork Park have a kind of a tradition. They have they have the speed that John talks about, no doubt, and they have a very good goal scoring knack. And if they can unleash that, and that's what beat Clare essentially, they have a chance. I think Waterford will be a bit ahead of them. And I don't think they're quite at the level that Limerick are yet. So I have my doubts, but they're heading in the right direction. They're not that the capacity for goals. They had about 7 chances against Clare to score goals. If they were a bit sharper, they could have got more than 3. So, and they've been working on that clearly. So they have a plan, and they have players capable of executing that. They know exactly what direction they're headed. So yeah, they're in there. They're playing Dublin. They'll be favourites to win that. And they're in a semi-final then after that. So, I don't think they're good enough to win the All-Ireland personally, but, it wouldn't be a huge shock if they did either, I guess.
Yeah, John, what's your assessment of them? Do you think they can win the All-Ireland?
Oh, you couldn't write them off. Absolutely not. No way. I've been banging the drum about Cork the last couple of weeks. I think if they get into Crowe Park, they're going to be extremely dangerous. That was a big win for them the weekend. I thought Robert Downey I was delighted to see him being tried out at full back because, the last couple of years he's been wing back, around the half back line. I think they played him in a league game, full back. It was 18 months ago. He was very good. We didn't see him there again, and I thought he came in and done a very, very good job there. As Dermot alluded to there, Spillane is due back. Cooper got on the field the weekend, and they have speed. I mean, Jack O'Connor, frightening speed. Robbie O'Flynn, Harnedy seems to have his mojo back. They have a very, very good midfield in Dara Fitzgibbon, Luke Meade. Yeah, I think look, Cork are on the rise, and if they get over Dublin, and I think it's the draw. If Waterford possibly beat Tipperary, they divide Limerick then. So there's every chance they could make a final, and Cork in a final, you wouldn't write them off. But yeah, no, something is definitely happening down Lee side, and I wouldn't like to be playing them. And I think they'll win the weekend, and that'll put them in a semi-final. And I just think, again, a bit like Waterford, momentum will be with them, and they seem to be building down there. So yeah, for me, I don't think you could write them off. I think they've every chance.
And Dermot, I know Clare obviously came out on the wrong side of the result, but overall in 2021, how do you think Brian Lowe and the Clare panel will reflect on it, considering they started with a defeat to Antrim, and then I think they lost the lead against Wexford the following week, and with all the off-field stuff as well. I know you were writing about it at the time. It was a very tumultuous period, but they did seem to rebound quite well, put in some very impressive performances, and while they have been eliminated, is there a bit more positivity around the team now than you would have maybe thought earlier in the campaign?
I think so. Well, I mean, I've personally felt that the Antrim defeat, too much was nearly made of that. I thought it was maybe overblown in terms of the consequences of it. That's just like a personal view. I thought Antrim were kind of making some progress. Yes, it was a bit of a surprise, but they're difficult up there, and they showed that afterwards. But anyway, they're finishing on a positive, really. Tony Kelly had that chance at the end. You would have backed him to score it. I mean, he was after bringing them back into the game by winning a penalty just a couple of minutes earlier, and he was in that kind of groove. So it's a very, very fine line between Clare being in the draw or being in the quarterfinal and not being. So they were slow to start on Sunday or on Saturday, which was typical of them because they've been very quick out of the blocks for the previous games. But their form was good, and they've kind of. They're defensively now, they look a bit, I would say the full back line looks a bit better. Now, the half back line has issues. The decision to move John Conlon back, while you might say nothing venture, nothing gained, I think ultimately didn't really work out, and maybe it was too late in the season to maybe start moving that around again. Paddy Fitzpatrick, did really well to come back into the setup at a late stage in his career and give some great performances. But we talked about pace. Maybe pace wouldn't be one of his strengths, so they made a change there, got David McInerney in there. So they have to work on that half-back line, certainly, for next year. Up front, they definitely missed Shane O'Donnell. If you put him back into that mix, the forwards did quite well, but they were a bit thin on the bench on Saturday, so they need to kind of try and strengthen the squad. But just from an overall point of view, if you're saying, was it a good year for Clare, even though it finished disappointingly, I would say probably yeah, and I would think people feel that Lohan is on the right track, and there's a good energy around the team, definitely, and they seem to be playing for him, and they seem to be upbeat about it. Bear in mind as well, and I suppose this applies to Shane O'Neill or to any of the other managers, I suppose, that are after coming off the back of defeats now and maybe bad seasons, that the COVID aspect, which is limited, truncated the season basically and made it unconventional and a shortened season and changed the whole preparation, all that, has probably to be weighed in any kind of assessment of a manager's performance, I think, to be fair, particularly last year. And this was a bit more like the real thing with the summer hurling and football and that, and with smaller crowds and a bit of atmosphere. But the whole preparation obviously was held back with COVID, and it's very hard to manage a situation like that and to see where you're at, So I think that would nearly need to be factored into the equation when you're assessing any. But Brian Lohan, I think people, I couldn't see how you wouldn't see it as being anything but positive. And let's see how it goes maybe for a third season now, when it's more, hopefully, a natural, proper open season with no restrictions and proper preparation. You know, that's going to be the key one. But he has work to do. He has work to do in defence. He was defender himself. I think he'd be happy the way Conor Cleary played on the whole full back. Rory Hayes, very good. Struggled a bit now, all right, on Jack O'Connor, but a good mobile corner back, which they needed. And Paul Flanagan, the other corner, doing well. Probably okay in the wings. They just need to fix that thing. John Conlon won't be centre back next year, and I'm sure he'd be happy to not be. And they probably missed him up front as well. So, but overall, yes, positive, I think. And I think that they'll take a lot from the championship.
Yeah, John, we might go to you there for the last word. It sets things up nicely for this weekend, the 2 quarterfinals. Waterford, Tipperary, we touched on earlier, and Cork, Dublin. Who do you see coming out on top in those 2 games?
Yeah, well, look, if Waterford bring to the table what they brought last weekend in the first half, you know, I'd give them every chance of beating Tipperary. Look, our record against Tipperary, we've played them since we beat them in 2008. I think Shane McGrath touched on it there on Radio 1 this morning. I think it was, we've played them 8 times, we've lost 7, and there was one draw. So I think this time has come now where we've got to put that to bed now, and you know, I think we've got to overcome Tipperary. But look, you know what, Tipperary, how psychologically are Tip going to be affected after that Limerick game? Knowing Sheedy, I think Sheedy will have them right at it. A lot will depend on the venue, obviously, whether it be down in Cork or possibly will it be in possibly Nolan Park. But I think if our lads, if they perform to the levels they performed last weekend, I think they'll win the match. But you know, nothing surprised me in this game. Like, who would have foreseen that Waterford performance last weekend? You know, so we've got to be mindful of you know how good Tipperary are, and they've got some top players. So look, in the media, it's going to be built up all week, Liam versus Liam. But I think Liam Cattle will be, you know, he's very astute, he's very shrewd. I think he'll manage that, and he'll realise that look, it's not about him or it's not about Liam Sheedy. It's just about winning a game of hurling next Saturday. So yeah, I think Waterford, and I think Cork, Dublin. I think you know, they met last year. I actually tipped Dublin to beat Cork last year in the winter hurling. A lot will depend on you know, Owen O'Donnell, will he start? You'll have the COVID boys back as well. They won't be affected by it this weekend. And just going on the COVID, I just think lads have got to be very, very cautious now over the next couple of weeks for whatever teams are still in the championship. And it might be even a small thing about travelling in your car alone, you know, and not bringing a lad, you know, not bringing 2 or 3 lads in your car. And, you know, even a small thing last night, and you're watching the match, like, and you're seeing lads swapping jerseys, like you know, and a jersey full of sweat of your opponent, like a small thing like that, like, you know, that I just think needs to be avoided, because, you know, one thing, a lad gets COVID, or, you know, if there's a COVID case and you're a close contact, that could possibly rule you out for a quarter-final and possibly a semi-final. So I think lads got to be very, very mindful of that going forward over the course next week, couple of weeks. But look, for me, I just think something is happening down in Cork. I think I did say it, if they could get over the line against Clare, I think they could go deep into this championship, and there's every possibility they could go all the way to the final if they avoid Limerick. So I just think Cork, after getting that game under their belt last weekend, getting a bit of a fright, and I just think with the abundance of speed, you know, the forwards, they have that goal threat up top, and I think they've a couple of more players coming back, like Spillane, Cooper. I would give Cork the nod. So I'm going to go for Waterford and Cork.
Well, felt to be 2 thrilling quarterfinals. John, Dermot, thanks so much for joining me.
No, what I will.
That's all we have time for this week on the Throw-In podcast in association with Board Gosh Energy. We will be back next week with another podcast looking back on all the weekend's action. And in the meantime, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Board Gosh Energy, proud sponsors of the GAA All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship and GAA Legends Tour Series of Crowe Park. #Hurling to the Core.